Okay, so welcome everybody to our 1, 2, 3, 4. No, what are we at? No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. We're at our sixth. Sorry, two hands. Our sixth presentation for our Humans Connecting with Horses conference. Again, as you've heard me say, I say our first conference because we have this habit in equine leadership of doing things more than once. So. But we won't talk about that yet. Let's get through the first one. And equine leadership has always been about, you know, that model that horses have for us. That model of living, as we say, that's peaceful and positive, but it's heart-centered, and they really can. They can teach us so much about living, and especially in this challenging time that we're all going through. They are. As one of our Facebook groups says, is humanity needs the horses. They need us, you know, more. They need the horses more now than ever. And equine leadership is just a way for us to, a platform for us to share their voices and their wisdom. And to be a small part of that is an honor in my books. So a little technical stuff. Graeme, I don't know, however you want to run this as far as answering questions as we go, or we can do it at the end, or we can do both.
Okay, well, what I was going to suggest, we will do a Q&A at the end if people would like that. But as we're going through this, if you'd like to put stuff in chat, you've got comments or observations that you want to share in chat as we're going through, I'll have a couple of stops in the middle, if you like, or pauses in the middle, and we'll just check in on chat, if that works for everybody. Because sometimes it's actually nicer to have the discussion a little bit closer to the topic. If that works for everybody. Yeah, happy smiley faces.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Okay, then over to you, Graeme.
Bless you. Thank you very much, Linda.
Oh, you're right.
Okay, so me, Graeme Green. So I'm going to be sharing some slides. So I'm going to start sharing. So feel free now. You can put yourself onto hide video and onto mute for now. And as I said, as we go through this, please feel free, if any of this resonates with you and you want to just bring some stuff up, to share it in chat, and we'll pick it up. Otherwise, just hold the stuff and we'll pick it up at the end of the session. Or I called the talk "Why Humans Have Always Needed Horses," with a sort of it was an incorrect reference back to Linda's main earlier COVID project, which was that COVID project, which was the "Why Humanity Needs Horses." And I liked that idea, but I wanted to assert a slightly different position here tonight. And it's a little bit more about why humans have always needed horses. I'll explain the difference as we go through this. But what this evening is really very much about, and as I say, I'll talk to you a little bit more as we go through this, but this is about storytelling. And this is about a deep passion of mine about the long-standing and the longevity of the relationship between horses and humans. But again, I'll come back to that as we go through. So just flicking through the slides. Best you all know who I am. I founded something called the Mindful Horse, which has been going a few years now. I'm also director of a company, my own business, which is called Mindful Mindset, in which I do coaching, leadership work, and things like that. My main equine facilitated work is principally at Athena Herd in Kent, UK, Southeast UK, where I'm a facilitator and a trainer. So running workshops there and training other people with our certificate and diploma in equine facilitated learning. So that's what I'm doing there. I'm a mindfulness and an emotional intelligence practitioner, particularly in terms of embodied mindfulness and emotional intelligence. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but that really motivates and leads most of the work that I do. I'm a mental health first aid trainer. I'm a professional leadership and performance coach, and I do energy healing work. I'm a Reiki drum master, and I dowse, as at least one person in the room will attest to. So that's a little bit about me. We're not going to linger on that one. Let's have a quick chat about what I'm going to be talking to you about this evening. So why humans have always needed horses. This is going to come back to our topic of equine facilitated learning, but I am going to take a slightly tangential view to equine facilitated learning. So I'm not going to talk to you specifically about why equine facilitated learning works, etc., etc. I'm going to assume as well that you know that. So we're going to be talking about telling ourselves stories, and what does it mean to tell ourselves stories, and why do we tell ourselves stories, and what effect do those stories have on us. We're going to talk about mythology. Again, a few people who know me will know that I love to talk about mythology, and particularly how mythology or how horses play a role in our relationship or within the stories that we tell in mythological terms. We'll then talk about what the hell has all this got to do with horses. We'll look at a little bit about what it means to be a social animal and what all this ties into, or what all this reflects into in terms of us as social animals and horses as social animals. And then we will come full circle, if you like, and we will talk about what I call Equinlightenment. I did threaten Linda that I would make up a word specially for the evening, and I have, and that's the word I've made up for the evening, Equinlightenment. And we will talk about what that is at the end of my talk. So, just make sure I'm roughly giving you what I want. So I'm going to start by talking about this idea of us telling ourselves stories. What does that mean? Every day, this is the little quote that I've put together to kick it off. Every day, the stories that we tell ourselves shape our beliefs. In so doing, they manifest our behavior and so serve to frame our experience. So the stories that we tell ourselves really create this whole model of our experience. And we don't pay enough attention to our internal narrative, to our internal dialogue, and this is what I want to shine some light on this evening. And these stories, they feed into how we feel about things, and because of that, they shape our emotional states. They shape how we feel about things. Similarly, it helps us to make sense of the world around us, and this is where it starts to get really important. The stories and the narratives are much more than just, oh, it's a lovely day and I went to the seaside. There is really strong, solid information, particularly in traditional storytelling, that ties into how we make sense of the world around us. And those stories manifest in the time that we spend with horses. And it manifests in the time that our clients spend with horses. We take our stories of horses, they bring their stories of horses. And those stories will shape how those interactions play out. And storytelling, real storytelling here. So I'm talking storytelling as an oral culture that predates the written word. It's not just the words that are spoken. It's a somatic expression. It's an embodied sharing of information and knowledge. And the mythologies and the folk tales that we tell ourselves are replete with horses. And that's where this all ties together for me. And this is where it all becomes an important common theme. And this is where really I want to take the discussion this evening. And all the way around the world, there are stories, mythologies that tell of how the world is, that tell us the truth of the world. But it also shares with us, those stories share with us horses. So here you've got just a few of them. So in the middle of it, you've got Odin Sleipnir, which we're going to talk about him quite specifically in a minute. In the top right-hand corner screen, as you look at it, you have Lungmar. This is that half horse, half dragon. It's a Chinese that symbolizes the alchemy of heavens and earth in that animal. You have the 4 horses of Apollo that draw the sun across the skies. So as you can see, horses start to bring color to our imagination. They bring color to our stories. They're as much part of the stories as the heroes or the human heroes that we follow in those stories. And so this is what makes this such a special topic, and for me such an important topic, because every time we connect with a horse, every time we connect with horses or we work with horses, we're connecting with this culture of relationship between human and horses that goes back thousands of years. Sometimes it may be a little bit brutal in its elements in that relationship, but they are still key parts of our relationship. You know, human beings would not have been able to achieve a modicum of what they have achieved without literally riding on the backs of horses. So these animals have an incredibly special part to play in understanding who we are. And it's amazing to find ourselves in the 21st century. Now we are beginning to work with horses to help ourselves, to help us refine ourselves, to learn a little bit more about ourselves, to help start to heal ourselves. So what I want to talk about is this quote comes from a traditional storyteller, mythologist called Michael Meade, "The lies that tell the truth." And that's what he describes as mythology. Mythology are these stories, clearly fantastical stories. Whether you be thinking about the labors of Hercules or the Epic of Gilgamesh, whether you be thinking of Iris and Osiris, all of these stories, completely fantastical, but they contain within them truths. And what do I mean by that? Or what does he mean by that? He talks about they express the reality behind the reality. So what they do is there is this story, but as we dig into the story, as we learn to read about the stories, it draws us in to its narrative, but it also shares some magic with us. And so Joseph Campbell, the really insightful mythologist of the late mid-20th century, really basically came up, he studied mythology and mythological tales of the world around, and came up with 4 essential reasons for mythology. There was this metaphysical, so it tied in with the spiritual and the religious. Essentially, it helped us define that magical realm that existed just beyond our actual physical perception. He talked about the cosmological. It was that part which helped us to understand the universe and the material world around us. We didn't always get it right, but it helped to place us as individuals and give us some sense of how that tied together. The sociological, so it talked about our society. It helped us to understand the culture that we live in, the social groups that we are part of, the mores of our society, if you like. And then the pedagogical. And what that means is essentially we're talking about the individual lives, our emotions, our feelings, our senses. So we have this multiple layering of stories. And we'll come back to Joseph Campbell's work in a little while, because it's really, in terms of understanding and positioning human beings in this, his work is really important. But what these stories do is these narratives that humans tell themselves and have told themselves for generations help people to position themselves and make sense of their lives and the world around them. In oral cultures, the knowledge of a whole of a tribe, the knowledge of a culture was handed down through these stories from generation to generation. It extended much further, yeah, than just storytelling. This was how we shared the wisdom of our ancestors, through the stories that we told ourselves. And that's why these stories are so important. So I want to tell you a story. It seems important. It seems right to share a story. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to really give you a quick story. And then I'm going to pause for a little bit and we'll check chat and things like that. So if you want to share something, this is a good time to share it because we'll be coming back to it. So I'm picking on that beautiful 8-legged horse in the middle. Really interesting image, the 8-legged horse. It turns up in mythologies around the world as far afield as Norway and South Korea. But again, this concept is probably this little concept that actually the more legs you stuck on a horse, the faster it would go. But the idea of this 8-legged horse comes up time and time again in ancient cultures. It's usually tied into shamanic lore or shamanic ritual as well, or shamanic tales as well. But what we're talking about here is this one specifically. This is a horse called Sleipnir, and Sleipnir is famous, if you want for better description, of being the great white steed that the god Odin travelled around the world or the universe tree of Yggdrasil, traveling between the upper, mid levels and lower levels of existence. Without this magical horse, he could never have made those journeys. But the story of how he comes about is a great example of how mythology teaches us about humanity. So this is about the building of the citadel of Asgard. And the Norse gods at that time knew that they needed to build a new citadel. And they looked for people to tender to do the work. Sounds sort of familiar, doesn't it? And they found this giant who said he would do it alone. And he would do it in 3 seasons. But he demanded a specific fee. He demanded the fee of the goddess Freya in marriage, and possession of the sun and the moon. And the gods were certainly not going to give up the sun and the moon, let alone Freya. But they sort of quite fancied him for doing the work. So they set him an objective that they believed he would not be able to achieve, to do it in 1 season. And he said he accepted this on the basis that he could bring in the support of a mighty stallion who worked with him. And his idea was that the stallion was called I can never say this, so Svadilfari. And the stallion basically did the building with the carrying and half of the building work alongside the giant. And amazingly enough, between the 2 of them, they were getting to the end of the 1st season, and they were going to do it. They were going to deliver what they had said they would deliver, and the gods were going to have to give up one of their number and the sun and the moon. And the gods were not happy with this. And so the gods said to Loki, you need to get us out of this mess. You need to make sure he doesn't achieve what he set out to achieve. And so Loki goes, yeah, I can do that. That's the sort of thing I do. And so he disguised himself as a mare on heat. And the next morning went and just hung around by this new citadel, by the building of this new citadel of Asgard. And I think you can guess what happened. And basically is what Loki did was to run away from the stallion. And the stallion, being a good red-blooded stallion, chose to chase after Loki. what this meant was that the giant could not finish his work on time and so would not receive the payment that was due to him. But what happened? Two things then happened. The stallion caught up with Loki and did what stallions do. And Loki was with Foal in his equine form and eventually gave birth to the horse that we see in the middle of our screen, the horse we call Sleipnir, now called Sleipnir. And that horse was gifted to Odin. He was deemed to be, he was called the finest of all horses at that time. And the giant was furious and threatened all sorts of revenge upon the gods. And so the gods sent Thor to slaughter the giant. And so the ending of this tale is we don't have a giant anymore. We have an almost finished citadel, and we have this magical eight-legged horse. So that's the end of the. That's pretty much that's Sleipnir's story. Obviously, as I said, Sleipnir worked with Odin thereafter in his travels around the Norse universe. So I'm just going to stop there, and I'm just going to check in with chat, or if there's anything anyone would like to ask at this point. Okay, so Victoria's saying that she was going to leave us and she looks forward to watching the presentation. Anyone like to share anything at that point or ask anything at that point before I move on? And you're probably wondering what this has got to do with EFL, but I'm hoping that what we will do is we'll bring this back into that context of actually this idea of the relationship, this deep and profound and long-standing relationship between humans and horses. Okay, so I don't see any questions, so I'm going to move on. I should go back to the share now. So where do we get to? So I want to start to share this idea of so in our myths, we are making sense of the world, okay? But if we go back to the Greek language, in Greek, the ancient Greek language, there was two levels of knowing. There was what they call mythos and what they called logos. Logos is, if you like, quite simply logical. It's the facts. It's the Mr. Spock existence. It's information. It's stuff that we know. We know what time the sun comes up. We know what time it goes to bed. We know that, I don't know, you know, we know that night follows day. We know that when the clouds come over, sometimes it rains. So this is facts. This is facts. But they also had this idea of mythos. And mythos, in those terms, it was experiential knowing. It was what we learn from and what we know from what we experience. And so in the work that we do as in equine facilitated learning, we are connecting with this mythos level of knowing. It is experiential learning. It is experiential knowing. So the people that we work with, it's not the facts. It's not, did they do the task? Did they not do the task? It's their experience in that moment. It's experience in doing that task. And the narrative, it helps to establish some perspective around that and around our own journeys. And I just wanted to share one other one. This idea of time as a reference point in our journey. Again, the Greeks had two forms of time. They had chronos, which we know fairly well as chronological, that natural timeline, that that natural flow of things that continue on from one place to the next place, to the next place, to the next place. But then they also had this thing which they called kairos. And the kairos, they sort of called the right time, the right moment. It was the time to act. It was the moment of learning. It's a bit like, essentially, kairos time is mindfulness time. But if you bring the two together, and you bring them together, particularly more the mythos and the logos, if you bring those two together, that myth and that logical, it's a bit like, so anyone out there who's familiar with dialectical behavioral therapy, they talk about this wise mind. It's this matching and balancing of the emotional with the logical minds, and that the mythos, the logos, for me, really plays that. And being able to connect with kairos as a model of time helps us to connect with our experience, helps us to notice what's going on rather than being lost in the chase to move forward through time. And so we've come up, we think of a whole different ways of thinking about how we actually make sense. How do we use these stories to make sense? So one idea, which is the last bullet here, is the hero's journey, and it shows that picture on the right-hand side. It's the work of the mythologist Joseph Campbell. And what Joseph Campbell just realized was that essentially there was this journey. And if you read mythology, the heroes of the mythology all follow this journey. They start in the normal world. Then something magical and strange happens to them, or a stranger arrives, and that stranger calls them into an adventure. And that adventure pulls them deeper and deeper into probably mortal or life-threatening events. And in those life-threatening situations, they learn something about themselves. They learn something about reality. And slowly, through challenges, they find their way back to the real world, wiser and more enlightened. And if you take the hero's journey literally, you can superimpose it onto Harry Potter. You can superimpose it onto the Hunger Games. You can superimpose it onto Star Wars. This journey repeats itself today in our current mythologies, in our current tales, and it reflects our lives. Yeah. Right now, we are in the hero's journey, or we're coming out. We're probably somewhere coming out to the end of the cycle. We're coming. Maybe some degree of normality is coming back to us, but actually, we have been on that hero's journey through lockdown. Our world has been turned upside down by something that was out of our control, and we had no choice but to go into it and live within it. And we're now coming out of it. Will we come out of it wiser? Will we come out of it edified in any way? Or will we just come out of it and fight to get back to where we were in February? Interesting point. And then another way of doing this is the tarot. And in the tarot cards, for those of you that don't know, the deck is split into two, of a major and a minor arcana. The major arcana is a story of life. It's a story of a journey through life and the challenges that we face, everyday life. It's another hero's journey type model of helping us to understand the journey that we need to take in this journey of enlightenment and learning. And there's 22 cards, and they represent those challenges. So I use those quite a lot now. And with my colleagues at Athena Herd, we've created this set of decks, this deck of cards that reflects the major arcana of the tarot deck. And so using horses from their herd, we basically, is what we're doing, is we're sharing this idea of inspiration for those moments or those parts of your own journey. And so what about stories and our minds? Why are stories so important? Well, they have a very strong effect on our brains. At a simple level, we need narrative. Narrative helps us to make sense. Think of something really simple. Think about losing your car keys. If you lose your car keys, what do? You panic for a while. And then when you calm down, you probably tell yourself the story of where you had them last. Where had you been the last time in the car? What happened when you returned to your house? And you talk your way through the story. And suddenly, in the middle of that story, a little thing goes ding. And we remember where they might be. So what I want to do actually is I just wanted to let you guys do something for a second. Stories and the stories we tell ourselves about situations and places have a significant effect upon us. So I'd just like you all to close your eyes. And as you close your eyes, just like you to settle down with your breath, settle down a little bit deeper into your chair, a little bit deeper into your body. And what I'd like you to now do is to bring to mind the image of somebody that you love or someone that is important to you. And let that image coalesce in your mind, come together in your mind. And make that picture of them as complete as it can be. And now notice what has happened to your body. Notice how you feel a connection to that person in your body. And now just letting the image of that person dissipate in your mind and bringing yourself back to your breath. Just settling with your breath and sitting with your breath for a few seconds. And now what I'd like you to do is to bring to mind the image of someone you find a little bit challenging, who can be a bit difficult to deal with. Someone who rubs you up the wrong way, perhaps. And in the same way, let an image of them come together in your mind. A full and complete image of that person in your mind. And now notice how your body has reacted to that image, to that idea. And notice the difference between that and the first person that we brought to mind. And now just coming back to your breath and letting the image of that person dissipate. And just settling back to your breath and letting that person go and letting the feelings associated with that person go. Don't hold on to them. But just make a note to yourself, because I'll ask you a little bit when we get to the end of the session. Just make a note to yourself now of what difference you felt in those two situations, because those differences that you felt were your experiential reactions to the different stories that you tell yourself about those different people. That's your embodied response to the narrative of those people, or the narrative of your relationship with those people. And it's different. And this is where the magic of our work with horses comes into all this. When we work with horses, it's those subtle shifts in our physiology that change how we interact with the horses. And so what happens to our minds? First of all, you get this extended cortex activity. When we're thinking about facts and when we're talking about facts, we get very small, specific, and this is basically work drawn out from neuroscience and fMRI work. We get sort of pinprick points of the brain that focus on those facts. So little points of our brain light up when we're presented with or we're talking about facts. What happens when we tell stories is that they have shown that you get this much wider engagement with the brain. The whole brain or other bits of the brain come to life to connect with the stories. And what sort of things does that mean? There's mirroring, for example. So what I mean by mirroring is we get similar reactions in the listener's brain to the storyteller's brain. So at a neurological level, we are sharing the same thing. We are sharing the same experience. We're raising emotions. Storytelling engages and stimulates our neurotransmitters, particularly dopamine. And by stimulating the dopamine, it helps us to strengthen our creation of memory, and also to help us to recall at a later stage. So the magic of weaving reality into our stories, or information into our stories, as we do with the mythologies, this is why this is so important, because we can remember the story. A really good example of just how powerful remembering can be when we you think about Solzhenitsyn when he wrote the Gulag Archipelago. Huge book. Even to read the abridged version takes people a very long time. And he held that in his head as a narrative all the time he was a prisoner. And then you get this neurocoupling. And so what also happens is that the stories engage and activate the brain such that the person who's listening feels like they are in the story. How often have we done that? How often, when we lose ourselves in a book, do we lose ourselves in the actions or activities of the hero and the heroine? That's because the stories are activating our minds. Our minds are playing out the cinema of the story within ourselves. And again, this is why this idea of understanding stories, and what has that got to do with equine facilitated learning? Well, the stories that we tell ourselves about the situations we're trying to work on, about our relationships with horses, are embodied in all of these different ways. And so what happens is that these stories play out when we're with our horses. So what does this mean? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through to the end of my slides, and then I'm going to pause so we can all come together rather than breaking at this point. And so back to the horses. Time with horses is an embodied storytelling time. There is this morphic resonance of generations past. What does morphic resonance mean? It comes from a biologist by the name of Rupert Sheldrake, who believes in the presence of the past. And he talks about essentially that something that happened in the past and that is repeated, maybe some kind of ritual or some kind of practice, gets better, gets stronger with each generation. So it's very simply, it might be our horses are just getting better at being equine facilitated coaches, because we're now probably, since we kicked off, so this work was first kicked off, we're probably 30 or 40 years down the road. Generations of horses have started to do this work. But generations of humans and generations of horses have always had this symbiotic relationship. Our livelihoods are interwoven. When we set ourselves tasks or ask clients to do things with horses, we're making them the hero, facing their challenges. And it's the opportunity to open up and explore their stories. And if we can open up and explore someone's stories, if we can let them feel heard, we can give them an opportunity, if necessary or needed, to maybe reframe that experience or reshape the narrative. And so there is this chance to be different. There is this chance or this opportunity for difference. And that's what we're modeling. That's what we want our clients to experience. That's what experiential learning is. It's this opportunity to embody and learn from that embodied difference. And so, how does this? Why does it work? It works because we're social animals. I'm singing to I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's worth just coming back to this. It's an opportunity to, at a simplest level, it's an opportunity to bond. The act of touching between two mammals, touching with kindness, raises oxytocin in both beings. And this raising of oxytocin forms a bond. It draws us together rather than pushes us apart. There is this empathetic connection. The more we understand, the more research is telling us about relationship or the emotional similarities in the lives of horses to human beings. As we begin to understand this commonality of emotion, we're able to create an empathic connection because we begin to understand that the being before us is experiencing something that we would recognize. It's this subtle space of co-regulation, of being able to calm each other. Think about just placing your hand upon the chest or the wither of a horse and just allowing yourself to breathe with the horse. And notice as you do that and think about it, what that does to your physical state. Or think about times where you've done that and what happens to both the emotional state of you and the horse. It's this playing out this somatic social interaction. And this interaction, it's a practical of emotional and social intelligence. This is what's playing. This is what our stories are facilitating. And when we change the stories, when we change the narratives that is going on in that moment, we change the experience. We can change the story, if you like. And lastly, what you have in that moment is this recognition that meaningful communication goes much further than language. It's not just about words. I know a lot of us out there already know this, but just being with horses is sometimes enough. We don't have to do things. We don't have to have tasks. We just need to share the space. And so what I wanted to do is I come back to this concept of equine enlightenment. Equine enlightenment. What we're doing is it draws parallels to this Buddhist idea of awakening, the Buddhist idea of enlightenment. What happens in the Buddhist idea of awakening is that we start to take away the levels of learning. We take away the levels of conditioning. We bring ourselves back to pure awareness. And that's what good equine facilitated and equine assisted practices do. They lose some of the narratives, some of the unhelpful stories that we've carried around with us, and allow us space to create new stories, to change the narrative. And as we peel back the layers, we can lose some of the complexity of ourselves. We can let go of some of those learning and conditioning practices that don't serve us well, or those behaviors that might have worked brilliantly when we were 5 years old, but at 55 are really not that helpful to us. And so what's happening is that horses are beginning to help humans make sense. There is a return to this connection, and it's this idea of mythos, this experienced reality that helps us or facilitates that connection. And that's where I want to leave the message with you. And so just a couple of quotes. One from Contemporary Shamanism magazine: nature does not tune in to us, we tune into nature. If we are out of tune, it's time to get out of our own way and to become in tune by letting nature in. Yeah, it's all the stuff that we carry with us that holds stuff outside. When we peel back in, when we take back those layers, when we peel off those layers, we're open to experiencing what's really there. And then that last quote, which I just think is probably the most beautiful quote ever written: see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. So thank you very much. Any questions? That would be grand. Anyone like to share anything? If you're still there, maybe bring your cameras back if you'd like to. But I'd like to open up the discussion. How's that been for you guys?
Shall I start, Graeme? So
yes,
it was fantastic. I loved it. Thank you. And what a lovely reminder of the power of storytelling. So one of my finds in lockdown, which myself and my son have been enjoying, was a storyteller who normally goes around sort of festivals and things. And he's been doing some stuff on Zoom, and we've really been enjoying that. And I love the way tonight that you pulled it together with the horses. Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Anyone else like to add anything? Or Tara, go on.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. Yeah, this is kind of new to me, but not to my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't own any horses. Had experience with mindfulness. I'm actually a physio by trade, and the lovely Debbie on Monday introduced me to this conference. So I'm really blown away by your talk.
Oh, bless you. Thank you.
Yeah, and the importance of the magic, but the connection, and yeah, I'm all fired up. So thank you.
I mean, I think it's. I mean, I was saying to Linda before you came along, the trouble was I wanted to talk for 3 hours. I've had about 3 hours I wanted to do. And so I had to really...
We don't mind.
Thank you. But the bit that I think is really important, it's for me, what this is all about is this idea of, I said in there, this morphic resonance, this repeated habit through generations. How horses have been part, horses have been part of our imagination, of our inspiration for thousands of years, not just beast of burden. That, if you go back to the cave paintings in Lascaux and places like that, these are animals of inspiration. And even if at sometimes they were animals of a hunt, there was an acknowledgement of a greater spirit within those animals when people were seeking to hunt them. And so, I think it's I get really fired up about this, because I think actually we've lost that connection with horses. And one of the magical things about this work that we all share, or most of us share in, that are here, is that to a degree, we're reconnecting with that. We're reconnecting, we're refiring the magic of relationship between horses and humans. Please, thank you. I'm really pleased you enjoyed it, Tara. Sorry, who was about to...
I was just going to say, I find it really interesting that maybe up to a few generations ago, horses were in all our lives, because they were the method of transport, of work, etc. And then, maybe since the Second World War or whatever, they've gradually died away. And I love this idea, and I'm thinking of myself here, of maybe things skipping a generation. Because
that's a nice idea. Yeah.
My granddad was in the cavalry. He was a mounted policeman. He died before I was born. And my mum and dad certainly, although my dad liked horses, it wasn't in my childhood at all, as in the family. But I was born the youngest of 4, totally obsessed with horses. And no one knows why.
Where did that come from?
Where did that come from? Exactly, because it wasn't directly handed down. And what I've noticed in the work that I do is a surprising amount of usually women who are in their probably 50s or 60s, and they phone me up or email me, and the conversation always starts like this: you're going to think I'm mad, but I've never had horses in my life, but I've been dreaming about them, or they keep coming into their mind. You know, there's always a slight twist on the story, but it's the same basic thing. The horses are calling people. And again, where did that come from? These are people that have gone through, you know, 5 decades or whatever with no connection with horses, and then suddenly they need it. I had a journalist come to me once who was supposed to be interviewing us for a magazine, and halfway through she just burst into tears and said, I keep dreaming about horses. She ended up coming to us and you know, had an amazing time. And yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Fascinating.
But you think, you know, again, if this idea of morphic resonance has any value in it, so you've got to think it's not just 100 years of equine human relationship. It is right back to prehistory. You know, we're going thousands of years before the birth of Christ, maybe tens of thousands of years if you look at some of the stuff that archaeology is finding now. If there is any form of emotional habit that gets passed from generation to generation, the one that connects humans to horses is so deep. And I think, you know, it's like my mother, again, family connections, Debbie, like you mentioned. My mother was a street trader in the East End just after the Second World War, or she came from a street trader family during the Second World War, and they had a horse, but that horse wasn't a pet. And they didn't have fields to turn the horse out in. It was a stable at the back of their terraced house, but they needed that horse to get produce to sell each day in the market. Now, without that horse was the most important member of their family, because without that horse, they had no livelihood. They couldn't feed themselves. So they would have to feed their horses before they fed, or their horse, sorry, before they could feed themselves. Now, that's a relationship in 21st century Western world that I don't think any of us can understand. But that's how a huge part of humanity has lived for thousands of years, with that absolute dependency. Yeah. Anyone else like to, any short stories they'd like to share?
I don't have a short
Karen.
story. Hello.
Hi there.
I don't have a short story, but I do want to speak to the meditation that you did. I had a very surprising reaction, and I appreciate it. Of course, for the loving, comfortable one, I felt the warmth in my heart. But for the not so loving one, I expected to feel it in my gut, and it was more like a punch to my heart.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's something for me to think about. And where can I get those tarot cards?
These ones?
The ones you were talking about, the horses, yeah.
I can put a link up to them afterwards.
Linda will put a
Would
link
you?
up.
Yeah.
They're wonderful. I have them myself. They're lovely.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
They're beautiful. And thank you. This is lovely. Thank you so much.
Bless you. Thank you, Karen.
I really liked it, and it was a sort of an aha moment for me, because I know, you know, you and I know each other and the power of stories, but to link the stories to the neurological and the physical and the somatic, even though we know a story can have a, you know, a visceral effect on us, I don't know, there was something in there that that linkage was really powerful. It was oh, wait a minute. Yeah, like, and everybody comes in with the story, and yeah, that part was really strong for me. It was, thank you. It was really it's like, wait a minute, somatic, the neuroscience, all in, you know, you know, you started with mythology and then ended up in neuroscience. I'm like, how did he even get there? Like, but it's all tied in, and the time and the mythos and the logos, like. And I've never heard that the story of Odin other than in Marvel movies, I have to say. So I was like, oh, there actually is a story? Wait a minute.
Yeah. Do you know what? Well, I think it's what you say, you know, it's, you know, I finished with the little poem from William Blake. And I think William Blake is one of my heroes, if you like, because Blake slightly predates the Age of Reason. So we hadn't quite got to what Antonio Damasio called Descartes' error, this separation of mind and body. So what happened with René Descartes was you had this, suddenly we were rational beings disconnected from the primitive emotional body. And so we lost that really meaningful connection and relationship between our bodies. And in the Western world, we've continued to do that. And we've done that more and more and more and more. And so we've got to this point where people joke, you know, it's like you hear people joking, you know, your body is something that gets your mind to meetings.
Oh.
That's the only bit it does. But it contains so much information. You know, anyone out there who works with trauma will know the power of what the body holds. Bye-bye, Susanna. Thank you. Who would like to add? Is there anything else anyone would like to ask or comment on the meditation? Or
sorry, Graeme, may I ask you?
Oh, Anne, hello. Yes, of course.
Because I come from a family where horses were important, but I don't have any personal collection at the moment, apart from dreaming about one last night. But apart from that, is it possible for you to give us a little vignette of a typical client who comes to you and the process and how it changes, or without taking the whole program, how you work with the story and the horse's story, so that in the end you have something beautiful for both of them?
Yeah, okay, short vignette. Okay, so sorry to everybody else who does this every day. So
I'm sorry. No, it's okay.
No, that's fine. It's okay. No, it's fine. Just a really short one for you. So you need a bit of geographical knowledge. So some of you out there are in the UK. So this is a story about the M25. Funny enough. For those of you who are not in the UK, the M25 is the motorway that rings London, and it is famously appalling in terms of the amount of traffic that it has. Okay, it's permanently gridlocked, basically. And I was doing a piece of work with somebody and a client with one of my horses, or my only horse, and I was getting them to think about their experiences in life and some of the challenges that they face in life and places that they wanted less of or more of in their lives. And so I didn't ask what these places were. I just basically allowed them to go and find those spaces. And this lady took my horse into one spot. And he's a bit, Ernie, some people know Ernie, he's a bit headstrong. But he just planted. He refused to move. And there was no getting him out of this space. And I'd watched it a few times, and I just thought, what's going to happen here? And it's like, no, it'll change. And nothing happened. And there was nothing this lady could do. She couldn't reconnect with him. She couldn't do anything. So eventually I just like, so where are you now? She goes, oh, I'm on the M25. And so my horse had just planted and refused to move. So again, what did we do? We had to move her forward from that. So the story we had to tell her, the story she had to change was to let go of some of her tension. To let go of, can I remember the exact words? So it's like, can we tell yourself a different story about this? It doesn't matter that I'm stuck here. We can just enjoy being here.
Yeah.
It can be cool. Or this isn't important. Or the other thing was, we also worked with the idea of, actually, this isn't important because I'm not going to do this for much longer. I'm going to cut this out of my life. And suddenly we were able to move. because the stories that we tell ourselves change our physiology, they change our behavior, because they change our beliefs about things. And the bit I was sort of trying to say earlier and didn't explain very well when I was talking about René Descartes, is that the problem we have now is that we compartmentalize everything. So there's the brain, or there's the body, there's the emotions, there's the muscular systems, there's the skeleton, there's the digestive system. We are not a mass of different systems. We are an embodied, what's the word? Emergent process. We are an emergent process. Each one of us is an emergent process that brings together all of our different systems within our bodies and all the different experiences that we've had. But we kid ourselves when we think only one of those things is at play at any one time. And in each one of us, all of those things are at play, which is why, if you think about, this is why I think things like holistic medicine work and energy healing work, because we want them to. We engage with those things completely. It's not about laser, it's not just about solving the problem in the big toe by looking at the big toe, if that makes any sense.
Thank you so much, Graeme.
That
was
answer?
magnificent. Yes, yes, yes. Beautiful. I love it.
Okay.
Graeme, Kim asked earlier about what the name of the eight-legged horse.
Sleipnir, and it's spelled Slepnir. Sleipnir.
Thank you.
I wanted to just comment on one of your comments about, the nonverbal communication, which is so powerful. And I feel like, I didn't grow up with horses, although as a little girl, summer treat would be, we'd go horseback riding, but, I didn't know what I was doing. And it was like every once in a blue moon kind of thing. But I love animals in general. And about 15 years ago, really started to become involved with horses in a different kind of way. And about 4 years ago, I went to a place in Kamloops, British Columbia, Equinlightenment. And I walked into the barn, and as I was walking from my tent to the barn that morning, I was missing my daughter and my grandchildren profoundly. And I'm so far away. I live in New Jersey, and here I am across the country and up north, and I missed my grandchildren. And I felt sad, even though I was happy to be where I was on some level. I walk into the barn, and one of the mares was in an area of the barn with her foal, and the foal was sleeping on the floor of the barn. And I sat there on a stool for a few minutes, and I thought, I really want to hug this foal, because I wanted to be with my grandchildren. And so, but I didn't know how the mother, would react to this. But I slowly laid down my full body along the length of the foal and had my arm around her. And after about 5 minutes, the mare, laid down also next to us. And I thought, like, she was letting me be a grandmother. She was letting me be a mother because she felt safe enough to take a nap, so I let my daughter nap, I took care of the grandchildren, they could nap, she could nap. And that's what the experience was to me. And I felt like, how did she know that I needed this? And she let me have it, it's just like such a profound moment.
And we get tied up in our words, and it's like the thing that I talk to people about a lot is, you just told us a beautiful story. Okay, but I bet you the experience was more beautiful than the words you've just shared with us.
Oh my God, it was otherworldly.
and what happens by the time we put the stuff into words, we've lost some of the richness of the story.
Yeah.
Because we don't have, however good we think our language is, it's not complex enough.
True.
To really express the richness of felt sense when we're open to it.
Yeah. But telling the story though brings back the moments, even if the words aren't adequate. But it does, like I'm
you can replay it in your.
Yes.
and as like it said, to a degree, there's a mirroring going on for us.
Yeah.
Because as we're hearing your story, we're playing it out in ourselves.
Yeah.
So we're feeling some of that love that you
Yeah.
felt in that moment. So
Yeah.
thank you, because
Oh,
you've
you're
just
welcome.
enriched us.
My
You've just
pleasure.
enriched each one of us.
Thank you.
You're brilliant, Lena. Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful session.
Okay. Linda, what was you? Linda, you're on mute.
Wow, that's the first in 6 times. I'm hope we don't go downhill from here. Graeme, thank you as always. Your sessions and your conversations are always wise and equine lightning.
Oh, that word. That's a great word.
It's Equinlightenment.
Equinlightening. Sorry, I'll get that right. I will practice. And profound. You always leave us with something to take away and sit with. And I know for a fact that I took notes. And we'll rewrite them and read them over, and it's you always give us stuff that we can mull over and sit with, and that becomes part of our story.
Wonderful.
So with that being said, thank you for being part of all of our story. And just everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
For
Thank
being here.
you.
And,
It's a privilege. Thank you.
Absolutely.
This was wonderful. Thanks so much.
If you're interested, if anyone's interested in following me, the Mindful Horse on Facebook is usually where you'll find me hanging out.
Yep. And I'll put that stuff all up on. I'll have this in this morning's.
And you'll put the links.
Tonight.
And you'll put the links up for the cards. They're lovely. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
It's been lovely, everyone. Thank you very much for your time.
Bye.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.